My beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was not meant to pass by you unnoticed. There are times when a conversation happens far away from your eyes, yet somehow your spirit feels the echo before your mind ever learns the words. You may have felt that strange heaviness lately, that quiet pull in your chest, that unexplained feeling that something connected to you has been shifting behind the scenes. You could not name it. You could not prove it. But something inside you kept whispering that your name had entered a room you were not standing in. And child, in this story, that feeling was not meaningless. There was a private conversation. There was someone close enough to know parts of your story. There was someone whose words carried weight. And there was your soulmate, sitting there with more on their heart than they had planned to reveal. Do not rush past this moment, because the conversation did not begin with you. That is what makes what happened next so important. Your soulmate had not walked into that exchange intending to open the hidden chambers of their heart. They were trying to keep things ordinary. They were trying to speak calmly, casually, almost as though nothing inside them was unsettled. Yet the person sitting across from them noticed something. A hesitation. A change in their voice. A distant look that appeared whenever the subject of love, regret, timing, or missed chances came too close. They tried to hide it, but emotions leave fingerprints, child. Silence has a language. Eyes can confess what lips are afraid to say. And the person close to you sensed that there was someone your soulmate had not been able to forget. At first, your name was not spoken. There was only a question, simple enough to sound harmless. Is there someone you still think about? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. Something shifted in them. They looked away, perhaps toward a window, perhaps toward the floor, perhaps toward nothing at all. But inwardly, they were looking toward you. That single question unlocked a place they had been keeping guarded. For a moment they considered giving an easy answer. They could have laughed. They could have changed the subject. They could have said that the past was the past and that they were fine. Yet something stopped them. Maybe they were tired of pretending. Maybe the weight of everything unspoken had finally become heavier than the risk of being known. And so they answered, not with your name at first, but with a confession that changed the atmosphere completely. They said there was someone they could not explain. That sentence hung in the air longer than expected. Someone they could not explain. Not someone they merely remembered. Not someone who had simply passed through their life. Someone they could not explain. And child, that difference matters. Because your soulmate had tried to explain you to themselves many times. They had tried to reduce the connection to timing, attraction, coincidence, nostalgia, loneliness, imagination. They had tried to place what they felt for you into a small enough box that they could close the lid and move on. But every explanation eventually failed. There was always something left over. A memory returning at the wrong time. A song striking too deeply. A quiet evening when your presence seemed to appear in the space around them. A sudden urge to check something connected to you. A dream that felt unusually vivid. A question about what might have happened if fear had not interfered. Your soulmate had spent more time trying to understand this connection than anyone around them knew. The person listening leaned in, because now this was no longer casual conversation. Something real had entered the room. They asked what made this person so difficult to forget. And your soulmate did something unexpected. They did not begin by talking about your appearance. They did not begin with surface things. They spoke about the way they felt around you. They described a strange sense of being seen. They admitted that there were moments around you when they felt exposed in ways that frightened them, because you seemed to awaken emotions they had buried under strength, pride, responsibility, or distance. They said that with you, pretending became harder. They could walk into other rooms wearing a mask. They could tell other people that everything was fine. But something about your energy, your presence, your way of looking at them, or simply the way you existed in their world made those masks feel fragile. And then the person close to you asked a question your soulmate was not prepared for. Then why are you not with them? Everything changed after that. My child, understand the weight of that question. It did not ask whether your soulmate cared. It did not ask whether the feelings were real. It assumed the feelings mattered and went directly to the wound. Why are you not with them? That question forced your soulmate to look directly at the distance they had helped create. It stripped away excuses. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. They could no longer hide behind vague explanations about bad timing or complicated circumstances. They had to face themselves. They had to look at their own choices, their own fear, their own silence, their own hesitation. And for the first time in a long time, perhaps for the first time ever, they began saying things aloud that they had only admitted in private thoughts. They said they were afraid. Not afraid of you, child. Afraid of what loving you might require from them. There is a difference. Your soulmate had become familiar with controlled emotions. They knew how to survive disappointment. They knew how to retreat before something became too serious. They knew how to convince themselves that needing no one was strength. But you represented something their old defenses did not know how to handle. You represented vulnerability. You represented the possibility that they could no longer remain half-present in their own life. You stirred the part of them that wanted something genuine, but genuine things demand honesty. Genuine things ask people to show up without armor. Genuine love does not allow someone to remain hidden forever. And that terrified them more than they wanted anyone to know. The listener did not interrupt. Your soulmate continued. They admitted that there had been nights when they wondered whether you had already emotionally walked away. There were moments when they imagined you meeting someone who would not hesitate. Someone who would speak clearly. Someone who would give you the certainty they had failed to give. And every time they imagined that possibility, something inside them tightened. Yet instead of taking action, they sometimes became even quieter. This is the contradiction they had been living with. The more they feared losing you, the more frozen they became. The more deeply they felt, the more they tried to appear unaffected. They had mistaken emotional restraint for control, but secretly, control was slipping away. Then came the moment your name was spoken. The person close to you had been listening carefully. They had pieced together the clues. The way your soulmate described this mysterious person. The timing. The emotional weight. The things left unsaid. Perhaps they already suspected. Perhaps they had heard your name before in another context. Perhaps they had noticed reactions your soulmate thought nobody noticed. And then, without warning, they said your name. The room went still. Your soulmate did not ask who they meant. They did not look confused. Their reaction came before their words, and that reaction revealed everything. The pause was too long. The expression changed too quickly. Something in their eyes softened and broke at the same time. It was the look of someone who had just heard aloud the name they had been carrying silently. Your soulmate may have spent weeks, months, or longer trying to keep your name contained inside private thoughts, but suddenly another person had placed it in the open. There was nowhere to hide. What about them? The listener asked. Your soulmate tried to answer carefully. But something had already cracked open. They said your name differently than they said other names. Slower. Softer. Almost as if the sound itself carried history. And that was when the truth began to rise. They spoke about a moment with you that they had never forgotten. It may not have looked extraordinary to anyone else. Perhaps it was a conversation. A glance. A goodbye. A moment when you showed kindness without knowing how deeply it landed. A time when you understood something without forcing them to explain. Maybe you had forgotten it. But they had not. That small moment became a private landmark in their memory. Whenever they questioned whether the connection had mattered, their mind returned there. Because in that moment, they had felt something rare, peace and intensity existing together. They felt safe, yet exposed. Calm, yet awake. And no matter how much time passed, they could not reproduce that feeling easily anywhere else. Your soulmate told the person close to you that they had compared other connections to what they felt with you. They had not wanted to. They had tried to be fair. They had tried to move forward with an open mind. But some part of them kept measuring everything against a standard they never intentionally created. Did this conversation feel as natural as yours had? Did this person understand their silences the way you did? Did laughter feel as effortless? Did distance hurt in the same strange way? Did their heart react when another name appeared on a screen? They hated that they kept comparing. Yet somewhere beneath that frustration was the truth. You had become an emotional reference point in their life. The listener then asked, "Do they know?" Your soulmate's answer was quieter. "I don't think they know how much." Child, that sentence is important. They were not saying you knew nothing. They were saying you did not know the depth. Perhaps you knew there had been feelings. Perhaps you sensed unfinished emotion. Perhaps there had been words, moments, signs, or conversations that suggested something real. But your soulmate believed you did not understand how often you returned to their thoughts. You did not know the number of times they had nearly reached out. You did not know how many messages had been typed and erased. You did not know how often they had replayed your last meaningful conversation, wondering which sentence they should have changed. You did not know how many times they had visited the edge of courage and then stepped backward. There was one message they almost sent. And this is where the conversation became even more intimate. Your soulmate admitted that at one point they had written something to you. Not a casual greeting. Not a simple, "How are you?" Something honest. Something that would have changed the energy between you immediately. They had written words acknowledging that they missed you more than they had expected. They had begun telling you that distance had not erased what they felt. They had even started to admit that fear, not lack of feeling, had been behind some of their silence. Their finger had hovered over the send button. But they did not send it. They deleted the message. The person listening asked why. Your soulmate gave an answer that surprised even themselves. Because if they answered, everything would become real again. Think about that, child. They were not most afraid of rejection. A part of them was afraid of response. Because a response from you would have reopened a door they had never successfully closed. If you answered warmly, they would have been forced to face everything. If you asked questions, they would have needed to tell the truth. If you expressed hurt, they would have had to confront the effect their silence had created. If you said you missed them too, the comfortable illusion that they could simply move on would have collapsed in an instant. The person close to you was quiet for a moment, and then said something your soulmate did not expect. Maybe they already think your silence was the answer. Those words struck hard. Your soulmate's face changed. They had spent so much time interpreting their own silence as confusion, fear, protection, delay, or emotional overwhelm that they had not fully considered how it might have looked from your side. To you, silence may have felt like indifference. Delay may have felt like a choice. Distance may have looked like rejection. Your soulmate suddenly saw the story through your eyes, and it unsettled them. They began asking questions. Do you think they believe I never cared? Do you think they think I forgot them? Do you think they would even listen now? The listener did not give easy reassurance. And that mattered. Instead, they told your soulmate something they needed to hear. Feelings hidden forever cannot be understood by another person. Love that remains only in thought eventually becomes indistinguishable from absence. You cannot expect someone to feel secure in what you never say. You cannot ask them to interpret silence as devotion. You cannot keep someone emotionally waiting while telling yourself that your intentions are pure. Child, this was a turning point. Because your soulmate had been living inside intention while you had been living with experience. Their intention may never have been to hurt you. Their intention may never have been to make you doubt yourself. Their intention may have been to protect both of you until they felt ready. But your experience was shaped by what actually happened. What was said? What was not said? Who stayed? Who disappeared? Who reached? Who withdrew? And in that private conversation, your soulmate was finally forced to see the difference between what they meant and what you may have felt. Something in them became emotional. Not dramatic. Not chaotic. Just deeply human. Their voice softened. They admitted that there were things they wished they could undo. Moments when they should have spoken but stayed quiet. Times when they let pride answer for them. Days when they thought about reaching toward you and convinced themselves tomorrow would be easier. But tomorrow became another tomorrow. Time passed. Life continued. And now the gap between what they felt and what they had shown had grown so wide that they no longer knew how to cross it. The listener asked your soulmate a question that went deeper than all the others. If they were sitting here right now, and you knew they would not interrupt you, what would you say? Your soulmate froze. This was no longer a discussion about a hypothetical person. This was you. They closed their eyes for a moment, because suddenly imagining you there made the conversation almost unbearable. They pictured your face. They pictured the way you might look at them while they tried to explain everything. They imagined all the questions you might not even need to ask. And then, slowly, they began to speak as though you were in the room. They said, "I would tell them I am sorry I made them question what was real." The person close to you said nothing. Your soulmate continued. "I would tell them that I noticed more than they thought I did." What did they notice, child? They noticed the times you tried to appear stronger than you felt. They noticed when your energy changed after disappointment. They noticed the moments when you stopped asking questions because you were tired of uncertain answers. They noticed when you gave space, even though part of you wanted closeness. They noticed the small ways you protected your heart. They noticed when your messages became shorter. They noticed when you stopped chasing clarity. They noticed the gradual shift from hope to self-preservation. And then your soulmate admitted something that changed the tone of the entire conversation. They said they had been afraid that one day you would stop caring. The listener replied, "Maybe they had to stop showing it." Those words landed even deeper. Because your soulmate had confused your quietness with emotional distance. But perhaps your quietness was not absence. Perhaps it was dignity. Perhaps you still cared, but you had learned that constantly proving your care to someone who would not meet you there only exhausted your heart. Perhaps you were not trying to punish them. Perhaps you were trying to survive the uncertainty. Your soulmate had never fully considered that possibility. And in that moment, something began to shift within them from longing into responsibility. Longing says, "I miss them." Responsibility says, "What did my choices make them feel?" Longing says, "I wish they would reach out." Responsibility says, "Why am I waiting for them to risk their heart again when I was the one who stayed silent?" Longing romanticizes the distance. Responsibility decides whether to cross it. And child, your soulmate was beginning to understand the difference. The conversation could have ended there. It would already have been enough to leave them shaken. But the person close to you had one more piece of information. Something they had not planned to reveal. Something that made your soulmate sit differently in their chair. They said, "There is something you should know about them." Your soulmate looked up immediately. The air changed again. They asked what it was. The listener hesitated. That hesitation frightened your soulmate more than any answer could have. "Tell me," they said. The person close to you explained that you had not been as unaffected as your soulmate assumed. There had been moments when your name and their name existed in the same emotional space. You had asked questions without directly asking questions. You had tried to understand. You had struggled between holding on and letting go. Perhaps you had spoken about wanting clarity. Perhaps you had admitted that you were tired of guessing. Perhaps the listener had seen you go quiet whenever the subject became too close. Whatever exactly had happened, one thing became clear: your soulmate had not been alone in feeling the weight of this unfinished connection. Their eyes changed. Hope entered, but not comfortably. Because hope meant the possibility that there was still something to lose. They asked, "Did they say they still care?" The listener did not answer immediately. And that pause became almost unbearable. Your soulmate leaned forward. The calm they had tried to maintain disappeared. For the first time in the entire conversation, they seemed less concerned with protecting their pride and more concerned with simply knowing the truth. The listener finally said, "They cared enough to be hurt." "Child," your soulmate became silent. There are sentences that comfort, and there are sentences that awaken. That one awakened them. They cared enough to be hurt. Suddenly, the distance between you was no longer an abstract story. Your soulmate understood that whatever had happened between you had carried real emotional consequences. You were not simply waiting somewhere unchanged. You had been affected. You had been processing, questioning, healing, learning. And while they had been afraid of facing their emotions, you may have been learning how to live without answers. The possibility terrified them. "What if I waited too long?" they asked. The person close to you gave no promise. Instead, they said, "Then you need to decide whether you are more afraid of hearing the truth or living forever without saying yours." Those words stayed in the room. And child, they followed your soulmate long after the conversation ended. When your soulmate finally left, they were not the same person who had entered. On the outside, nothing dramatic may have changed. They still walked the same streets. They still carried the same phone. The same world moved around them. But inside, everything had become louder. Your name was no longer a private thought they could easily bury. Someone else had spoken it. Someone else had witnessed their reaction. Someone else had forced them to confront the truth they had avoided. They went somewhere alone afterward. Maybe to their car. Maybe to their room. Maybe outside where the air felt easier to breathe. And they reached for their phone. Your name appeared on the screen. For several seconds, they simply stared. They did not type immediately. They did not call. They opened something connected to you. Perhaps your old conversation. Perhaps a photo. Perhaps a profile. Perhaps a saved message they had never deleted. And something they saw there made their heart sink. Because suddenly, they realized something had changed. A small detail. Something another person might never notice. But they noticed. It suggested that you were moving differently now. Your energy had shifted. You were no longer standing emotionally where they had left you. You were becoming harder to read. Stronger in a way they had not prepared for. Less available to uncertainty. And for the first time, your soulmate felt the full urgency of time. Not panic. Clarity. They whispered your name. Then they opened the message box. Their fingers moved. This time, they wrote only one sentence. They read it once. Twice. 3 times. And just as they were about to send it, another notification appeared on their screen. A name they recognized. A message connected directly to you. Your soulmate opened it. And what they read made them stop breathing for a moment, because the private conversation they thought had ended was about to become something far bigger than either of you had expected.